The moment Delilah Vale stepped off the stagecoach in Boise, Idaho, on that sweltering August afternoon in 1878, she knew she had made a terrible mistake, marrying Gerald Thompson 3 months prior. The bruises hidden beneath the long sleeves of her traveling dress throbbed with each movement, a constant reminder of the violent temper her husband had concealed during their brief courtship in San Francisco. She adjusted her bonnet and tried to keep her face neutral as Gerald roughly grabbed her elbow, steering her toward the modest hotel at the end of the dusty main street. The town sprawled before them, a collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up during the gold rush years and somehow managed to survive. Mountains rose in the distance like sentinels, their peaks still touched with remnants of last winter's snow despite the summer heat. "Stop dragging your feet," Gerald hissed in her ear, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to add fresh pain to the existing marks. "We need to secure lodging before I meet with the land office tomorrow." Delilah nodded mutely, having learned in their short marriage that any response could trigger his rage. At 22 years old, she should have been excited about this new adventure, about helping her husband establish a ranch in Idaho territory. Instead, she felt like a prisoner being marched to her cell. The hotel lobby offered little respite from the heat. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, pushed by some mechanism Delilah could not see, merely stirring the warm air around. The clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his ledger and offered a professional smile that faltered slightly when he took in Gerald's stern expression and Delilah's pale face. "Room for 2, Gerald said curtly. "We will be staying at least a week while I arrange our property purchase." As the clerk turned to retrieve a key, Delilah let her gaze wander to the window. The street outside bustled with activity despite the heat. Cowboys rode past, their horses kicking up small clouds of dust. A woman in a practical calico dress hurried by with a basket over her arm. And then Delilah saw him. He stood across the street, tall enough to tower over most men, with shoulders broad as an ox yoke beneath his worn leather vest. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He was speaking with another man, but even from this distance, Delilah could see the power in his frame, the easy confidence in his stance. Something about him reminded her of the mountains themselves, solid and immovable. As if sensing her gaze, the man looked up. Their eyes met through the dusty window glass, and Delilah felt her breath catch. His eyes were remarkably blue, even at this distance, and there was something in his expression that made her feel exposed, as if he could see straight through the walls she had built around herself. "Delilah!" Gerald's sharp voice snapped her attention back. "Take the key and go upstairs. I have business to attend to." She took the key with trembling fingers and climbed the narrow staircase, feeling relief flood through her as Gerald headed back outside. The room was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the street. Delilah sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to breathe. Her arms ached. Slowly, carefully, she pushed up her sleeves and examined the damage. Purple bruises in the shape of fingers circled both forearms. On her left bicep, a larger bruise bloomed in shades of yellow and green, several days older than the others. Gerald had a particular talent for hurting her in places that could be hidden, where no one would see and ask questions. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back. Crying accomplished nothing. Instead, she pulled her sleeves back down, buttoned them securely at her wrists, and stood to unpack their trunk. Movement kept the despair at bay, at least temporarily. The week passed in a blur of tension and fear. Gerald met with various officials during the day, his mood swinging wildly between excitement about their future ranch and irritation with the bureaucratic processes involved. Delilah bore the brunt of his frustrations, learning to read his expressions and anticipate his moods. though her predictions were not always accurate enough to spare her. On the 5th day, Gerald announced they would be moving to a property 30 miles north of Boise, up in the foothills where a previous homesteader had abandoned his claim. The land came with a small cabin and a barn in need of repair. They would leave the next morning. That evening, Delilah ventured out alone for the first time since arriving in Boise. Gerald had drunk himself into a stupor at the saloon, a common occurrence that usually meant she would be safe for a few hours. She needed supplies for the journey, fabric and thread to mend their clothes, perhaps some dried herbs if she could find them. The general store smelled of coffee beans and leather, a surprisingly pleasant combination. Delilah moved through the aisles slowly, savoring this small taste of freedom. She was examining bolts of fabric when she heard the door open behind her, followed by heavy footsteps. "Miss Clara, I need 3 pounds of your coffee beans, and I am running low on flour," a deep voice said, rich as honey and surprisingly gentle for such a large man. Delilah glanced over her shoulder and felt her heart skip. It was him, the mountain man she had seen through the window. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6.5 feet tall with muscles that strained against his shirt. But his eyes, those remarkable blue eyes, held kindness. "Right away, Vance," the shopkeeper's wife called from behind the counter. "Will you be heading back up to your place soon?" "Tomorrow morning," he confirmed. "Winter will be here before we know it, and I have preparations to make." Delilah turned back to the fabric, trying to make herself invisible. She selected a serviceable brown cotton and brought it to the counter, keeping her head down. "That will be $1.50, Miss Clara said cheerfully. "Are you the young lady who arrived with Mr. Thompson?" "Yes, madam," Delilah replied quietly, digging in her reticule for coins. "Well, welcome to Idaho Territory. If you need anything at all, you just come see me." The kindness in the woman's voice nearly broke Delilah's composure. She nodded mutely and turned to leave. But in her haste, she bumped directly into the mountain man's chest. It was like hitting a wall of muscle. She stumbled backward, and instinctively, he reached out to steady her, his large hands gripping her forearms. Delilah gasped in pain, unable to suppress the reaction. The man, Vance, immediately released her, but his expression had changed. His eyes moved to her sleeves, then back to her face, and she saw understanding dawn in their blue depth. "I apologize," he said softly. "I did not mean to hurt you." "You did not," Delilah said quickly, too quickly. I was startled." But she could see he did not believe her. His gaze lingered on her face, taking in details she wished remained hidden. The faint shadow of an old bruise near her temple that powder could not quite conceal. The way she held herself as if ready to bolt at any moment. The fear that lived behind her eyes. "Madame," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "if you ever need help, my place is about 20 miles north of town, up in the mountains. Red cabin with white trim, cannot miss it. Anyone in Boise can give you directions." "I am fine," Delilah whispered, clutching her package to her chest. "Thank you for your concern. But I am fine." She fled then, hurrying back to the hotel before Gerald could wake and find her gone. But that night, as she lay in the darkness listening to her husband's drunken snores, she could not stop thinking about those blue eyes and the quiet offer of sanctuary. The journey to their new home took most of the day. Gerald drove the wagon while Delilah sat beside him, holding her bonnet against the wind. The road, little more than a rutted trail, climbed steadily into the foothills. Pine trees replaced the scrub brush of the lower elevations, and the air grew cooler, fresher. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was more dilapidated than Delilah had expected. The roof sagged in one corner, and several of the window shutters hung askew. The barn looked only marginally better, but the setting was undeniably beautiful. Nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it and mountains rising on all sides. "This will do," Gerald said, surveying the property with satisfaction. "With some work, we can make this profitable." The work, Delilah soon learned, would fall primarily to her. Gerald spent his days riding the property boundaries, making plans, and visiting neighboring homesteads, while she was expected to clean the cabin, prepare meals, tend a garden, and help with repairs. The physical labor was exhausting, but in some ways, it was a blessing. When Gerald was away, she could work in peace, and the hard work meant she fell into dreamless sleep each night. But Gerald's temper had not improved with the move. If anything, the isolation made it worse. There was no one to witness his rages, no need to maintain appearances. When Delilah burned the biscuits, he backhanded her across the face. When she failed to have water heated for his bath, he shoved her against the wall hard enough to bruise her shoulder blade. When she dared to suggest they needed to purchase more supplies, he grabbed her by the throat and squeezed until black spots danced in her vision. She learned to move silently, to anticipate his needs, to make herself as small and invisible as possible. But it was never enough. 3 weeks after their arrival, Delilah was at the creek, scrubbing clothes against the rocks, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Fear spiked through her. Gerald had ridden out that morning and was not supposed to return until evening. If he found her away from the cabin with chores unfinished, there would be consequences. But the horse that emerged from the tree line was not Gerald's bay gelding. It was a large buckskin, and the man riding it was Vance Orin, the mountain man from town. Delilah scrambled to her feet, her wet hands clutching the fabric of her skirt. Vance dismounted slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal, and remained several feet away. "Madam," he said, removing his hat. "I apologize for the intrusion. I was passing through and thought I would check on you and your husband, see if you needed anything." "We are fine," Delilah said automatically, "but thank you for your concern." Even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. Vance's expression suggested he thought so too. His gaze traveled over her face, lingering on the fading bruise near her eye that she had hoped the bonnet's shadow would conceal. "Madam, forgive my boldness, but you do not look fine." "I fell," Delilah said, the lie coming easily after weeks of practice. "I am clumsy, always have been." "I see." His tone made it clear he did not believe her. "And your arms? Did you fall on those too?" Delilah's hands instinctively moved to her sleeves, pulling them more securely over her wrists. The morning was warm, too warm for long sleeves, but she wore them anyway, always. "Mr. Orin, I appreciate your concern, but you need to leave. My husband will be home soon, and he would not appreciate finding a strange man on our property." "When did he leave?" The question caught her off guard. "This morning." "Why?" "Because I saw him in Boise 2 hours ago, drinking at the saloon. He will not be home for several hours yet." The confirmation of what Delilah already suspected, that Gerald preferred the saloon to their homestead, should not have hurt, but it did. She looked away, blinking back tears. "Please," she whispered, "you need to go." "Show me your arms." "What?" "Your arms," Vance repeated, his voice gentle but firm. "Show me what he did to you." "I do not know what you mean." Vance stepped closer, and Delilah forced herself not to retreat. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, and there was something in his presence that made her feel safe, even as every instinct screamed at her to send him away before Gerald returned. "I have seen my share of injuries, madam. I know the difference between clumsiness and cruelty. Please, let me see." Tears were flowing freely now, and Delilah could not stop them. With shaking fingers, she began unbuttoning her left sleeve, then pushed the fabric up to her elbow. The bruises had faded somewhat, but they were still visible, still clearly the shape of grasping fingers. Vance's jaw clenched, and something dangerous flashed in his blue eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low and hard as stone. "How long has this been happening?" "Since we married," Delilah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was kind during our courtship, but after the wedding, everything changed. I thought perhaps if I tried harder, if I was a better wife, he would stop. But nothing I do is ever right. This is not your fault." The words, spoken with such conviction, broke something inside her. Delilah sank to her knees on the creek bank, sobbing. Vance knelt beside her, careful not to touch her, just offering his presence as comfort. "Madam, listen to me. This is not your fault, and it is not going to get better. Men like your husband, they do not change. The violence only escalates." "I have nowhere to go," Delilah said between sobs. "No money, no family. I am trapped." "You are not trapped. I can help you." She looked up at him then, really looked at him. His face was weathered from years in the mountains, his hands scarred and calloused from hard work. But those blue eyes held nothing but compassion and determination. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Vance said simply, "and because no woman deserves to live in fear. If I leave, he will find me. He will kill me. Not if I have anything to say about it." The steel in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "Madam, I know you are frightened, and you have every right to be. But you have two choices here. You can stay and let him slowly destroy you, or you can leave with me right now and start a new life." Just like that? Leave everything? What exactly would you be leaving? A cabin that is falling apart? A husband who beats you? Those are not things worth staying for. Delilah looked around at the small valley, at the creek and the mountains, at the life that had promised so much and delivered only pain. She thought about Gerald, probably drunk in Boise, who would return home tonight expecting dinner and submission. She thought about the years stretching ahead of her, filled with violence and fear. And then she thought about the possibility of something different, something better. "Okay," she whispered. "I will go with you." Vance's expression softened. "Get whatever you need from the cabin. We leave in 10 minutes. Delilah ran to the cabin, her heart pounding. She grabbed a bag and filled it with her few personal possessions. A photograph of her parents who had died when she was 17, the silver locket her mother had given her, a few items of clothing. She took nothing that belonged to Gerald, nothing that he could claim she had stolen. She scribbled a quick note. Just 4 words. "I am leaving you." When she emerged from the cabin, Vance was waiting on his horse. He reached down and lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle in front of him, settling her against his chest. His arm came around her waist, solid and secure. And for the first time in months, Delilah felt safe. They rode hard for 2 hours, climbing higher into the mountains. Vance's cabin, when they finally reached it, was exactly as he had described, red with white trim, nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. It was substantially larger than the cabin she had left behind, with a solid roof and a stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, well-maintained, with several horses visible in the corral. Vance dismounted and helped Delilah down, his hands careful on her waist. "You will be safe here," he said. "Gerald will not find you. He will look for me. When he realizes I am gone, he will be furious. Let him be furious. These mountains are my home. I know every trail, every hiding place. If he comes looking, he will not find anything." Delilah wanted to believe him. Standing here in the fading afternoon light, with mountains rising around them and the scent of pine in the air, it almost seemed possible that she could escape her past. Vance led her inside, and Delilah gasped softly. The cabin was beautiful, far nicer than she had expected. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace and furniture that, while simple, was well made. A kitchen area occupied one corner, and 2 doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. "You can have the spare room," Vance said, gesturing to the left door. "I will not bother you. You are safe here, I give you my word." "Why are you doing this?" Delilah asked again. "You risked yourself by taking me. Gerald could accuse you of stealing his wife." Vance turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "I saw the bruises that first day in town. I saw the fear in your eyes. I tried to convince myself it was not my business, that I should stay out of it. But I could not stop thinking about you, wondering if you were all right. So I rode out to check on you, and when I saw you today, I knew I could not leave you there. You could get in serious trouble. Some things are worth the risk." He paused, then added more softly, "You are worth the risk." Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one had ever said such a thing to her before. Gerald had certainly never made her feel valued or protected. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me. Just rest, heal. We can figure out the rest later." That night, Delilah lay in the small but comfortable bed in Vance's spare room, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt a small spark of hope. The next few days passed in a peaceful rhythm that felt almost surreal after the chaos of life with Gerald. Vance rose early each morning to tend to his horses and check his trap lines. He was a mountain man in the truest sense, making his living from furs and occasionally guiding hunters through the wilderness. His cabin was well stocked with provisions, and he proved to be a surprisingly good cook. Delilah helped where she could, cleaning and cooking, grateful to have tasks that were not colored by fear of doing them wrong. Vance was patient and kind, never raising his voice, never making sudden movements that might startle her. He gave her space and time, understanding without words what she needed. On the 4th day, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Vance finally asked the question she had been dreading. "Tell me about him, about Gerald." Delilah wrapped her arms around herself, even though the evening was warm. "What do you want to know?" "How you met, why you married him." She took a deep breath. "We met in San Francisco. I was working as a seamstress, barely making enough to pay for my room. My parents had died 5 years earlier, and I had no other family. Gerald came into the shop one day to have some shirts mended. He was charming, attentive. He courted me properly, brought me flowers, took me to dinner. I thought I was lucky to have attracted the attention of such a successful businessman." "When did it start?" "The first time he hit me was on our wedding night." The words came out flat, emotionless. "I said something he did not like. I cannot even remember what. And he slapped me. Then he cried and apologized, said it would never happen again. But it did. again and again. Each time, he promised to change. Each time, I believed him, because I wanted so desperately for it to be true. Vance's hands clenched into fists on his knees. And he brought you out here, away from anyone who might help you. The isolation was intentional, Delilah agreed. He knew that out here, there would be no one to witness what he did. No one to stop him. He was wrong about that. Delilah looked at Vance, really looked at him. In the fading light, his profile was strong and stern. But she had learned over the past few days that beneath the mountain man exterior was a gentle soul. He was rough around the edges, certainly, but there was a fundamental goodness in him that Gerald had never possessed. I am still married to him, she said quietly. Legally, I belong to him. The law is not always just, but it is the law. He has every right to demand my return. Vance turned to face her, and the fire in his blue eyes made her shiver. Let him try. 6 days after Delilah's escape, Gerald Thompson came looking for her. Delilah was in the garden behind Vance's cabin, pulling weeds, when she heard raised voices from the front. She froze, recognizing Gerald's angry tone, even though she could not make out the words. Terror flooded through her. She wanted to run, to hide, but her legs would not obey. Instead, she crept to the corner of the cabin where she could hear better. I know she is here, Gerald was shouting. You kidnapped my wife, and I am taking her back. Your wife left of her own free will, Vance replied, his voice calm but firm. She is not going anywhere with you. She is my property, legally bound to me. You have no right to keep her. I am not keeping her. She is choosing to stay. Lies. You seduced her, turned her against me. I will have the law on you for this. Go ahead. Tell the sheriff how your wife ran away. Tell him why she ran. Show him the bruises you left on her arms, the fear you put in her eyes. There was a moment of silence, then Gerald's voice, lower and more dangerous. I do not know what she told you, but my wife is clumsy, always hurting herself. She needs someone to take care of her, and that someone is me. Get off my property. Not without Delilah. Delilah heard the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. Vance's voice, when he spoke again, was hard as iron. I said, get off my property. You have 10 seconds before I start shooting, and out here, no one will question it if I say you threatened me. This is not over, Gerald snarled. I will have her back, and when I do, she will wish she had never been born. You need to leave, now. Delilah heard hoofbeats retreating, but she remained frozen against the cabin wall, trembling. A few moments later, Vance appeared around the corner. His rifle was still in his hands, but his expression softened when he saw her. He's gone, he said gently. You're safe. He will come back, Delilah whispered. He will bring the law, or he will wait until you're gone, and then he will take me. Vance set the rifle aside and took her hands in his. His palms were rough and warm, solid and real. Look at me, Delilah. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his face. I made you a promise. Do you remember? I promised that if you came with me, you would be safe. I keep my promises. Gerald Thompson will not touch you again. That ends today. But how can you stop him? He has the law on his side. Not necessarily. There are grounds for divorce in cases of cruelty. We can find a lawyer, build a case. It will not be easy, but it is possible. That could take months, even years. Then it takes months or years. I am not going anywhere, and neither are you, unless you choose to. Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes. But these were different from the tears she had shed so often in recent months. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of something else she was afraid to name. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Vance brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch feather light. "Because from the moment I saw you in that hotel, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Because you deserve kindness. Because I am falling in love with you, and I cannot stand to see you hurt." The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest and terrifying. Delilah's heart pounded in her chest. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt more connected to him than she ever had to Gerald. "I am still married," she whispered. "I know, and I will wait. However long it takes, I will wait." That night, Delilah could not sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Vance had said he was falling in love with her. The thought should have frightened her. But instead, it filled her with a warmth she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it was like. Was she falling in love with him too? She barely knew him, but she felt safe with him in a way she had never felt with Gerald. When Vance touched her, even casually, there was no fear, only comfort. When he looked at her with those blue eyes, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. The next morning, Vance announced he needed to ride down to Boise for supplies. Delilah tried to hide her anxiety, but he saw through her immediately. "You can come with me, or you can stay here with the rifle," he said. "Either way, you will be safe. Gerald would not dare try anything in town, and he does not know the location of this cabin well enough to find it again easily." "I will stay here," Delilah decided. The thought of seeing Gerald in town, even from a distance, made her stomach churn. Vance showed her how to load and fire the rifle, though he assured her it was just a precaution. "I will be back by sunset," he promised. "Lock the doors and do not open them for anyone but me." After he left, the cabin felt enormous and empty. Delilah tried to keep busy, baking bread and mending a tear in one of Vance's shirts, but every sound made her jump. When the sun began to set and Vance had not returned, fear began to gnaw at her. What if Gerald had found him in town? What if there had been a confrontation? What if Vance was hurt, or worse? Full darkness had fallen when Delilah finally heard hoofbeats approaching. She grabbed the rifle with shaking hands and positioned herself by the window. "Delilah, it is me," Vance called. "I am sorry I am late. The ride took longer than expected." Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees nearly gave out. She set the rifle down and threw open the door. Vance stood on the porch, his arms full of packages, looking tired but whole. Without thinking, Delilah threw her arms around him, packages and all. Vance made a surprised sound, then carefully set his burden down and then returned the embrace. His arms came around her, strong and protective, and Delilah buried her face against his chest. "I was so worried," she whispered. "I am sorry. I ran into some people in town, and they had questions about you. I had to be careful with my answers." Delilah pulled back to look up at him. "What kind of questions?" "Gerald has been telling people that I kidnapped you, that he is the victim in all this. I had to set some records straight." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That you came to me asking for help, that your husband was violent, and that you are staying with me of your own free will." "I spoke with the sheriff too. Told him everything." "And what did he say?" Vance's expression was grim. "That unless you file formal charges, there is nothing he can do. The law still views you as Gerald's property." Delilah felt hope drain away. "So I have no legal recourse?" I did not say that. The sheriff also said that if Gerald tries to take you by force, that is kidnapping, and he can be arrested for that. And I spoke with a lawyer about divorce proceedings. It is complicated, but not impossible. They carried the supplies inside, and Vance began unpacking them. He had brought fabric, thread, coffee, flour, sugar, and several other staples. At the bottom of one bag, Delilah found a book, a collection of poems by Walt Whitman. "I thought you might like something to read," Vance said, sounding almost shy. "The selection in Boise is limited, but the store owner recommended this." Delilah clutched the book to her chest, touched beyond words. Gerald had never bought her a gift, never done anything purely to bring her joy. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is wonderful." Over the following weeks, a comfortable routine developed. Vance continued his work trapping and tending to his horses, while Delilah managed the household. But their relationship began to shift, growing deeper and more complex. They would sit together on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Vance told her about his childhood in Missouri, how he had come west as a young man seeking adventure and found a home in these mountains. Delilah shared memories of her parents, her childhood in Pennsylvania before they had moved to California, her dreams of a different life. Sometimes their hands would brush, or their eyes would meet and hold just a moment too long. The attraction between them was palpable, but Vance never pushed, never demanded anything of her. He let her set the pace, respecting her need for time and space to heal. One morning in early October, Delilah was washing dishes when Vance came in from outside, his expression serious. "We have a problem." "What is it?" "I found signs of someone camping about 2 miles from here. Whoever it was tried to cover their tracks, but I have been in these mountains too long to miss it." "Gerald," Delilah whispered, fear clutching at her throat. "Most likely. He is trying to find this place, probably planning to watch until I leave so he can take you." "What do we do?" Vance's jaws set in a determined line. "We end this. Today. I am going to town to file a formal complaint with the sheriff. You are going to write out everything Gerald did to you, every incident you can remember. It will not be pleasant, but it is necessary." Delilah nodded, understanding what he was asking. She spent the afternoon writing, the words flowing from her pen in a cathartic rush. She documented every beating, every cruel word, every moment of terror. When she finished, she had 5 pages of testimony that laid bare the truth of her marriage. Vance read it that evening, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. When he finished, he looked at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "Sorry you endured this. Sorry it took so long for someone to help you. You did help me. You saved me. You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to land." The next morning, they rode to Boise together. Delilah wore her plainest dress, and Vance had trimmed his beard and hair, trying to look more civilized. They went first to the lawyer's office, where Delilah signed documents initiating divorce proceedings on grounds of cruelty. Then, they went to the sheriff. Sheriff Coleman was a grizzled man in his 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He read Delilah's testimony carefully, then looked up at her. "This is serious, Mrs. Thompson. Are you prepared to testify to all of this in court?" "I am," Delilah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Mr. Thompson has been claiming that Mr. Orin here kidnapped you." "That is not true. I left of my own free will. Mr. Orin has been nothing but respectful and kind." The sheriff turned his attention to Vance. And what is your interest in this situation, Mr. Orin? I care about Miss Vale, Vance said simply, using Delilah's maiden name. I want to see her safe and free. Miss Vale, is it? The sheriff raised an eyebrow. Getting ahead of things, are we not? With all due respect, Sheriff, I stopped being Mrs. Thompson the moment I walked away from that man, Delilah said. The legal paperwork is just a formality. A small crease of approval crossed the sheriff's weathered face. Fair enough. I will keep this testimony on file. If Mr. Thompson bothers either of you again, come see me immediately. In the meantime, watch your backs. Divorce proceedings can get ugly, especially when a man's pride is involved. They were leaving the sheriff's office when Gerald appeared at the end of the street. He saw them immediately, and his face contorted with rage. He started toward them, shouting Delilah's name. Delilah instinctively moved closer to Vance, who placed himself between her and her advancing husband. People on the street stopped to stare. Delilah, get over here right now, Gerald demanded. You are my wife, and you are coming home with me. I am not your wife anymore, Delilah called back, her voice shaking but clear. I have filed for divorce. Gerald's face went purple. You cannot divorce me. I have done nothing wrong. You beat me, Delilah said, loud enough for everyone on the street to hear. You hurt me almost every day of our marriage. I have the bruises to prove it, and I have given my testimony to the sheriff. You lying witch. I should never have married you. That is the first thing we have agreed on in months, Delilah replied. Gerald lunged forward, but Vance was faster. He caught Gerald by the shirt front and lifted him nearly off the ground, demonstrating the massive strength in his frame. Touch her again, and I will break every bone in your body, Vance said, his voice deadly calm. Look at her arms, Thompson. Look at what you did to her. It ends today. He released Gerald with a shove that sent the smaller man stumbling backward. Sheriff Coleman had emerged from his office, his hand resting on his pistol. Mr. Thompson, I suggest you go sleep off whatever you have been drinking, the sheriff said, and stay away from Miss Vale and Mr. Orin. If I hear of you bothering them again, I will arrest you. Are we clear? Gerald looked around at the crowd that had gathered, at the faces watching him with varying degrees of disgust and disapproval. His carefully maintained image as a respectable businessman was crumbling before his eyes. This is not over, he spat, but there was defeat in his voice. Yes, it is, Vance said. Walk away while you still can. Gerald turned and stalked off toward the saloon. Delilah released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Vance took her hand, his touch gentle despite the violence he had just threatened. Come on, he said softly. Let us go home. Home. The word resonated in Delilah's heart. Vance's cabin had become home in a way her marriage to Gerald never had. The ride back to the mountains was quiet, both of them processing what had happened. When they finally reached the cabin, Delilah felt exhaustion wash over her. The confrontation had taken more out of her than she had realized. You were very brave today, Vance said as he helped her down from the horse. I was terrified. Being brave does not mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. That night, Delilah could not sleep. The confrontation with Gerald had stirred up too many emotions, too many memories. She finally gave up trying and went out to the main room, intending to sit by the dying fire. Vance was already there, sitting in a chair with a cup of coffee. He looked up when she entered, concern crossing his face. Could not sleep. Too much going through my mind. Come sit. Delilah settled into the chair beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the embers glow. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah finally said. "Anything." "Why have you never married?" Vance was quiet for a long moment. "I always thought I would, someday. But I never met anyone who made me want to give up my solitary life in the mountains. And then I saw you in that hotel in Boise, and everything changed. You did not know me." "No, but I wanted to. And then when I saw the bruises, saw the fear in your eyes, I knew I had to do something. I could not walk away." "I think I am falling in love with you," Delilah whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Vance set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "You do not have to say that. You do not owe me anything. I am not saying it because I owe you. I am saying it because it is true." She took a deep breath. "I know I am still legally married, and I know this is all happening so fast. But when I am with you, I feel safe and valued and seen. You make me feel like I matter. You do matter." Vance reached out and took her hand. "You matter to me more than I can express." "I am damaged," Delilah said, her voice breaking. "Gerald left marks on me that go deeper than bruises. Then we will heal them together, however long it takes." Delilah leaned forward, resting her forehead against Vance's shoulder. His arms came around her, holding her close, and she felt tears slip down her cheeks. But these were not tears of pain or fear. These were tears of relief, of hope, of love beginning to bloom in the ruins of her broken heart. The divorce proceedings dragged on through the autumn and into winter. Gerald contested everything, trying to drag the process out. But the testimony Delilah had provided, combined with statements from several Boise residents who had witnessed his drunken rages, built a compelling case. The lawyer was confident they would prevail. It was just a matter of time. Meanwhile, life in the mountains continued. The first snow fell in November, dusting the pines with white and transforming the valley into a winter wonderland. Vance taught Delilah how to snowshoe, how to read animal tracks, how to survive in the wilderness. She had never felt more alive than she did exploring the mountains with him. Their relationship deepened as the weeks passed. The attraction that had been simmering between them grew stronger. But Vance remained a gentleman, never pushing her further than she was ready to go. They would sit together by the fire in the evenings, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying each other's presence. Occasionally, Vance would play the harmonica, coaxing surprisingly beautiful music from the simple instrument. One evening in December, as they sat together watching snow fall outside the window, Delilah found herself studying Vance's profile. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strength in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes. He had become her whole world, this mountain man who had saved her and then given her the space to save herself. As if feeling her gaze, Vance turned to look at her. The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That I want to kiss you," Delilah replied honestly. Vance went very still. "Delilah, you do not have to." "I know, but I want to." She leaned in slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. But Vance did not pull away. Instead, he met her halfway, his lips touching hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of restrained passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vance rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you," he confessed. "Why did you wait so long?" "Because you needed time to heal. Because I did not want you to feel pressured. Because I wanted you to choose me, not just accept me as a refuge from Gerald." "I am choosing you," Delilah said firmly. I choose you, Vance Orin. I choose you every day. They kissed again, longer this time, deeper. Delilah felt warmth spread through her body, a heat that had nothing to do with the fire. When Vance's hands moved to her waist, she leaned into his touch, no longer afraid. But Vance pulled back, his breathing ragged. We should stop. Why? Because you are still legally married, and because if we continue, I will not be able to stop. And you deserve better than that. You deserve a proper courtship, a wedding, all of it. Delilah felt frustrated tears prick her eyes. I am so tired of letting Gerald control my life. Even though I am here with you, he still has power over me through that stupid piece of paper. Then we fight harder to get rid of that piece of paper. But we do this right, Delilah. When we finally come together, it will be as husband and wife, with no shadows between us. She knew he was right, but that did not make it any easier. Still, the fact that Vance respected her enough to wait, that he wanted to do right by her, only made her love him more. Christmas came, and Vance surprised Delilah with a small tree he had cut and dragged inside, decorating it with strings of popcorn and dried berries. He gave her a beautiful shawl he had traded for in town, soft wool dyed a deep blue. She gave him a shirt she had sewn, embroidered with a simple pattern along the collar. I am not very good at embroidery, she said apologetically. The stitches are uneven. It is perfect, Vance said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. They spent Christmas Day together, cooking a simple but delicious meal and playing cards by the fire. It was the happiest Christmas Delilah had ever experienced, made more precious by the company. In January, word finally came from the lawyer. The divorce had been granted. Delilah was free. She stood in the cabin holding the legal document, hardly daring to believe it was real. Vance came up behind her, reading over her shoulder. It is done, he said softly. You are free of him. Delilah turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I am free. Vance cupped her face in his large hands, his touch infinitely gentle. Delilah Vale, I have loved you from the moment I saw you. I love your strength, your courage, your kindness. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, and the way you sing when you think I cannot hear. I love everything about you. Will you marry me? Yes, Delilah said without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Vance kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and passion and love. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and grinning. How soon can we arrange a wedding? Vance asked. I do not care if it is tomorrow or next month, as long as I become your wife. Tomorrow it is then. They rode to Boise the next morning, and by that evening, they were married in a simple ceremony at the church with the sheriff and his wife as witnesses. Delilah wore the blue shawl Vance had given her for Christmas over her best dress. Vance had trimmed his beard and looked almost civilized in a clean shirt and his best trousers. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Vance kissed Delilah with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and joyful and right. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Boise before returning to the mountains. Vance was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure Delilah felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together, it was nothing like the brutal encounters with Gerald. This was beautiful and intimate and full of love. Afterward, as Delilah lay in Vance's arms, she felt a peace she had never known was possible. The bruises Gerald had left on her body had long since faded. The ones he had left on her soul would take longer to heal, but with Vance beside her, she knew she would be all right. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Vance replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And I will spend the rest of my life showing you just how much. The winter passed in blissful happiness. Delilah settled fully into her role as Vance's wife, no longer a guest in his cabin, but a true partner. They worked together, laughed together, loved together. The mountains that had once seemed isolating now felt like a sanctuary. In March, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Vance one evening as they sat by the fire, nervous about his reaction. But Vance's face split into the widest grin she had ever seen. A baby, he breathed, his hands moving to her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it? Happy? Delilah, I am overjoyed. A child, our child. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this gift. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Vance was attentive and protective, almost comically so. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, refused to let Delilah chop wood or carry water. She found his concern endearing, even when it was a bit excessive. They spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Vance built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Delilah sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They talked about names and made plans for the future. One afternoon in July, Delilah was in the garden when she looked up to see a rider approaching. Her heart jumped into her throat, old fear rising instinctively. But as the rider drew closer, she realized it was not Gerald. It was a young man she did not recognize. Vance emerged from the barn, and the young man dismounted, handing him an envelope. They spoke briefly. Then the man rode away. Vance opened the envelope and read the contents, his expression growing dark. What is it? Delilah asked, walking over to him. Gerald is dead, Vance said flatly. He got into a fight in a saloon in Sacramento 2 weeks ago. Pulled a knife on someone and got shot for his trouble. Delilah waited for some feeling to emerge, grief or relief or satisfaction. But all she felt was a distant emptiness, as if Gerald's death was just another piece of news about a stranger. I should feel something, she said quietly. But I do not. Vance pulled her into his arms. You do not owe him anything, not even your grief. He made his choices, and he paid the price for them. I am glad he's gone, Delilah admitted. Is that terrible? It is honest. And it means he can never threaten you again. You are completely free now. That night, Delilah stood on the porch looking up at the stars. Vance came out to join her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Are you all right? He asked. I am, she said, and she meant it. I was just thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year ago. A year ago, I was trapped in a nightmare. Now I am here with you, expecting our baby, happier than I ever thought possible. You deserve this happiness, Vance said, his hand resting on her swollen belly. You deserve everything good in this world. Their son was born on a cold October morning, arriving with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. Delilah labored for 12 hours with a midwife from town, and Vance by her side. When she finally held her baby in her arms, she wept with joy. He is perfect, Vance breathed, looking at his son with wonder. What should we name him? Victor, Delilah said, because you helped me win my freedom, and he is the symbol of that victory. Victor Orin, Vance said, testing the name. I like it. The first year of Victor's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Delilah had never known she could love someone as much as she loved her son. Watching Vance with their baby, seeing him cradle Victor in his massive hands with infinite gentleness, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. The following spring, they traveled to Boise for supplies and to introduce Victor to the few friends they had made in town. Sheriff Coleman admired the baby and congratulated them on their family. Miss Clara from the general store cooed over Victor and pressed gifts into Delilah's hands, tiny booties and a soft blanket. As they prepared to leave town, Delilah paused and looked back at the hotel where she had first arrived, so scared and hopeless. It felt like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to someone else. "What are you thinking?" Vance asked, Victor secure in a sling against his chest. "That I am grateful," Delilah said. "Grateful for everything that led me here, even the pain, because it brought me to you." "I am the grateful one," Vance replied. "You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be a better man." They rode back to the mountains, to the red cabin that had become their haven. As they crested the ridge and the valley spread out before them, Delilah felt a surge of contentment. This was home. This was family. This was love. The years that followed were good ones. Victor grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. When he was 3, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Vera. 2 years after that came another daughter, Violet. The cabin grew too small for their expanding family, so Vance built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The work took most of a summer, with Victor helping as much as a 6-year-old could, handing his father nails and boards with serious concentration. Delilah thrived in her new life. The woman who had arrived in Idaho Territory broken and afraid had blossomed into a confident mother and partner. She helped Vance with his trapping business, kept an extensive garden, and became known in Boise for her exceptional sewing skills. Women would make the trek up the mountain to commission dresses and shirts from her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Vance surprised Delilah with a piano he had somehow managed to transport up the mountain. It was battered and slightly out of tune, but to Delilah, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "How did you know I played?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "You mentioned it once, months ago. You said your mother taught you before she died. I have been looking for one ever since." Delilah sat down at the keys and began to play, her fingers remembering the music even after years away from an instrument. The children gathered around, enchanted by the sounds their mother coaxed from the piano. Vance leaned against the doorway, watching his family with a smile of pure contentment. That night, after the children were asleep, Vance and Delilah sat on the porch as they had so many times before. But now, instead of the tentative beginnings of love, they had years of partnership and joy behind them. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked. "Taking me in that day. Your life would be simpler without all of us." Vance took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Never. Not for a single moment. You and the children are the best things that ever happened to me. This cabin was just a place before you came. Now it is a home." "I never thanked you properly," Delilah said, "for saving me. You did not need saving. You just needed someone to believe in you, to give you a chance to save yourself. You saw the bruises I tried to hide with sleeves, and you promised it would end that day. And it did. You kept your promise. I will always keep my promises to you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one above the mountains. In the distance, a wolf howled, and somewhere in the cabin, one of the children stirred in sleep. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life built on love and trust. 10 years after Delilah first arrived in Idaho Territory, she stood in the same spot by the creek where Vance had first asked to see her bruises. It was a warm summer day, and she was watching Victor teach his sisters how to fish. At 14, Victor had grown tall and strong, showing signs of the man he would become. Vera and Violet, at 11 and 9, were completely absorbed in their brother's instructions. Delilah heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Vance approaching. At 42, he was still as strong as ever, though gray had begun to thread through his dark hair and beard. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Remember the first time I found you here?" he murmured. "How could I forget? You changed my life that day. We changed each other's lives." They stood there together, watching their children, and Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Boise, bruised and afraid, married to a monster. She thought about the mountain man who had seen past her fear to the strength within. She thought about love growing slowly in the shadow of mountains, about healing and hope and second chances. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Vance replied. "Always have, always will." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the family gathered for the walk back to the cabin. Victor carried the fish they had caught, already bragging about how many he would catch tomorrow. Vera and Violet chattered excitedly about a bird's nest they had discovered. Vance and Delilah walked hand in hand, their children around them, heading home. The red cabin with white trim stood waiting, smoke curling from the chimney where dinner cooked on the stove. Inside, the piano waited for evening songs. The beds were made with quilts Delilah had sewn, and photographs of the family covered the walls. It was not a grand home by any measure, but it was filled with love. That night, after the children were asleep and the dinner dishes washed and put away, Delilah sat at the piano and played softly. Vance sat nearby, working on repairing a saddle, but his eyes kept drifting to his wife. She caught him looking and smiled, her fingers never faltering on the keys. When she finished the piece, Vance set aside his work and came to sit beside her on the piano bench. "Play the one you played on our wedding night," he requested. Delilah began a gentle melody, something her mother had taught her long ago. As she played, Vance's arm came around her waist, and she leaned into him, still playing. "I have been thinking," Vance said when she finished. "Maybe it is time to expand our horse operation, bring in some breeding stock. Victor is old enough to help seriously now, and we could use the extra income with 3 children to provide for." "That sounds like a good idea," Delilah agreed. "We would need to expand the barn. Already designed it in my head. We could start building in the spring." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future, for their children's futures. The easy partnership they had developed over the years made such conversations natural and comfortable. They did not always agree on everything, but they had learned to talk through their differences with respect and love. As they finally prepared for bed, Delilah caught sight of herself in the mirror. At 32, she looked younger than she had at 22. The fear that had haunted her eyes in those early days with Gerald was long gone, replaced by confidence and contentment. The woman looking back at her from the mirror was strong, happy, and deeply loved. Vance came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far I have come, about how grateful I am." "I am the grateful one," Vance said, echoing the words he had spoken years ago. "Every day with you is a gift." They climbed into bed, and Vance pulled Delilah close her back against his chest. This was her favorite way to fall asleep, secure in her husband's arms, safe and cherished. "Vance," she murmured drowsily. "Yes? Thank you for seeing me that day. Really seeing me. I will always see you, Delilah. Always." The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Victor grew into a fine young man, strong and kind like his father. At 18, he took over much of the horse operation, showing a natural talent for training and breeding. Vera, at 15, had inherited her mother's skill with a needle and spent hours sewing and designing clothes. Violet, at 13, was the wild one, more comfortable in the mountains tracking game with her father than doing anything domestic. When Victor was 20, he married a girl from Boise, a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah. They built a cabin on the other side of the valley, close enough to help with the family business, but far enough to have their own space. A year later, they gave Vance and Delilah their first grandchild, a boy they named Samuel. Delilah held her grandson for the first time and felt her heart expand yet again. Looking at this tiny, perfect being, she thought about the family she had built, the love that had grown from the ashes of her first disastrous marriage. "He is beautiful," Vance said, peering over her shoulder at Samuel, "just like his grandmother." Delilah laughed. "You are biased." "Absolutely." As Samuel grew, he was followed by cousins. Vera married at 19, choosing a young doctor who had recently moved to Boise. They stayed in town, where he could practice his profession, but visited the mountain as often as possible. Violet remained unmarried longer, finally finding a match at 25 with a fellow trapper and mountain man who could match her adventurous spirit. The red cabin became the center of a growing family network. Holidays brought everyone together, children and grandchildren filling the rooms with noise and laughter. Vance and Delilah presided over these gatherings with joy, their hands still finding each other across crowded rooms, their love as strong as ever. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. 3 children, multiple grandchildren, friends from town, and neighbors from surrounding homesteads all came to honor Vance and Delilah. Tables were set up outside, groaning under the weight of food. Music and laughter filled the valley. As the sun began to set, Vance stood and called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, all eyes turning to the mountain man who had become a patriarch. 25 years ago, Vance began, his voice carrying across the gathering, I met a woman who changed my life. She was scared and hurt, hiding bruises under her sleeves, trapped in a terrible situation. I promised her that day that it would end, that she would be safe. He looked at Delilah, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch even after all these years. But what I did not know then was that she would save me just as much as I saved her. Delilah gave me a family, a purpose, a love deeper than anything I imagined possible. She turned my lonely cabin into a home filled with joy. Every day with her has been a blessing. Vance raised his glass. To my wife, my partner, my love. To 25 years and many more to come. To Vance and Delilah, the crowd echoed, raising their own glasses. Delilah stood and moved to her husband's side, blinking back happy tears. I do not have pretty words like my husband, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But I can say this. Vance Orin saw me when I thought I was invisible. He believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. He gave me a reason to hope again. Everything good in my life comes from the day he asked to see what I was hiding and promised it would end. He kept that promise and so many more. I love you, Vance, more than words can express. They kissed while their family and friends cheered and applauded. As the celebration continued around them, Vance and Delilah slipped away, walking hand in hand to their favorite spot by the creek. The water babbled over the rocks, the same soothing sound that had been the backdrop to so many important moments in their life together. They sat on the bank, Delilah leaning against Vance's solid shoulder. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not left Gerald?" Delilah asked. "I try not to," Vance admitted. "The thought of you still trapped with that monster, it does not bear thinking about." "I would be dead by now," Delilah said matter-of-factly, "or so broken I might as well be. You saved my life, Vance. Truly saved it. You saved mine too. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me something to live for." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence, as they had always been. Finally, Delilah spoke again. "I want you to know that I have forgiven him. Gerald, I mean. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I refuse to let his memory poison even one more moment of my life. He is gone, and I am here, happy and loved. That is the best revenge I could ever ask for." "You are an amazing woman, Delilah Orin. I had a good teacher." As the stars began to appear overhead, they walked back to the cabin where their party was still going strong. Grandchildren ran through the yard chasing fireflies. Victor and Sarah danced near the musicians. Vera laughed at something her husband said while cradling their youngest child. Violet Arm wrestled with her husband, both of them grinning fiercely. This was the family Vance and Delilah had built together. Generation after generation carrying forward the love that had started with a mountain man seeing bruises hidden under sleeves and promising, "It ends today." In the years that followed, Vance and Delilah grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements slower, but their love undiminished. They became the wise elders of the family, the ones everyone turned to for advice and comfort. The red cabin remained standing, expanded and repaired over the years, but fundamentally unchanged, a testament to the strength of what they had built. Vance passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Delilah holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you." And Delilah took comfort in knowing he had died happy and surrounded by love. Delilah lived another 7 years, spending them surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. She still played the piano every day, though her fingers were not as nimble as they once were. She still tended her garden, though Victor often helped with the heavier work. She still smiled when she looked at the mountains, remembering the man who had made them her home. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when she had first met Vance, Delilah sat on the porch of the red cabin. Victor was there, now a grandfather himself, keeping her company. "Tell me again about how you and Dad met," he requested, as he had so many times over the years. Delilah smiled, her mind drifting back across the decades. "It was August of 1878, she began, her voice still clear despite her 80 years. "I stepped off the stagecoach in Boise, and I knew I had made a terrible mistake." She told the story again, not leaving out the darkness of those early days, but focusing on the light that had come after. She spoke of Vance's kindness, his strength, his unwavering love. She spoke of the life they had built together, the family they had raised, the love that had healed her broken heart. When she finished, Victor had tears in his eyes. "Dad was a great man." "Yes, he was. And you are just like him." Delilah passed away that night, peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. The family gathered for her funeral, celebrating a life well lived and a love story that had inspired them all. Victor and his siblings decided to keep the red cabin in the family, maintaining it as a gathering place for future generations. They filled it with photographs and mementos, turning it into a living museum of Vance and Delilah's love. Years later, one of Victor's granddaughters, a young woman named Emily, who had never met her great-grandmother but had heard all the stories, brought her boyfriend to see the cabin. As they stood on the porch looking out at the mountains, she told him the story of Vance and Delilah. He saw the bruises she tried to hide with sleeves, Emily said, and he promised it would end that day. And it did. He saved her, and she saved him right back. They built this whole family on love and courage and second chances. "That is beautiful," her boyfriend said. "And kind of amazing that it started from something so dark." "The best things often do," Emily replied. "Grand Delilah used to say that sometimes you have to go through the darkness to appreciate the light. And that love, real love, is worth fighting for." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the red cabin stood silent and strong, a monument to a love that had conquered fear and pain, a love that had built a legacy spanning generations, a love that had begun with a simple promise. It ends today, and it had. The fear had ended, the pain had ended, the loneliness had ended. In their place had grown something beautiful and lasting, something that continued to inspire long after Vance and Delilah had passed from this world into the next. Their love story, born in the wild west of Idaho Territory in 1878, lived on in their descendants, in the red cabin that still stood in the mountains, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale. It was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could flourish. That one person reaching out with compassion and courage could change everything. That love, true love, could heal even the deepest wounds. Vance Orin had seen a woman in need and offered help without hesitation. Delilah Vale had found the courage to accept that help and build a new life. Together, they had created something extraordinary. A love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. A family that carried their legacy forward. A story that would never be forgotten. The bruises had healed long ago, but the love remained eternal, as enduring as the mountains themselves.